Shut up and sit down.
The very Romanesque city of Adelaide is like an enlarged country town that was once stamped in the middle of an empty field. It was then encircled by an extended parkland with a series of emanating roads that once stretched out to the rural areas just on the other side. The fact that the entire town is one man's vision, the impact of Colonel William Light's decisions, are still very noticeable today. It has since outgrown its original design, and the enclosed area has now become a bustling CBD, while the suburban area is now stretching north and south, consuming the once farmland that was sandwiched between the Adelaide Hills to the east and the very boring St Vincent Gulf to the west, except for a handful of noticeable exceptions. The roads radiate out from the city like spokes from a wheel and have created some of the worst traffic I've ever come across. It's like Military Road in Sydney, but throughout the entire city. Some refer to Adelaide as the city of the churches, but the love affair with the sandstone building goes well beyond the public structures, as many of the locals seem to adore the idea of living in a historic home and have built themselves a house with an ornamental sandstone fascia. And it's not just the odd one or two, but many Adelaideans seem to value the colonial style to the point that I found it disturbing. Personally, I would start looking for a connection between the local governments and the quarry owners, as for the true motivation behind preferencing such a difficult material. The love affair for the difficult is not only present with the locals' choices of building materials, but it's also visible in the horror show that are the South Australian roads. Since entering SA a few short weeks ago, I've witnessed several serious accidents and had to avoid numerous drivers who just don't want to follow the road rules. Many motorists seem to drive with the expectation that other road users will have the ability to avoid them, and are far too pompous to accept that the rules apply to them too. I think in part because the traffic is so bad that they're all trying to push their way through and have the attitude that if someone else does, then they can too. And in part, many of the locals have questionable aptitude for the road rules. South Australia has 6.9% of the population, while having 8.7% of the National Disability Insurance Scheme recipients, making them the NDIS capital of Australia. Additionally, we can find supporting evidence for this when we look at which local businesses are succeeding, being the community grocer and the salvos. Perched behind the city is a mountain range, which provides a different climate from the lowland at its footing. The hills are quite steep and host a number of grape, olive and goat farms. It's a picturesque mini Blue Mountains, and is lovely riding through them to the pubs on the ridgeline. And during the hot dry months, the valleys provide some respite from the northerly desert blasts. The contrast between the cold winter and the hot summer is painfully obvious when you look at the native vegetation. The hill's northerly aspects are covered in a sparsely forested grassland savanna, where many of the trees that are growing in the creek lines, with a thin layer of grass that can quickly sprout out during the wetter months. While in the sheltered valleys, they are mostly overwhelmed by thirsty weeds, with the lantana providing ample shelter for the black snakes. On the east coast of Australia, many of the forested areas are covered in bracken, with a thick undergrowth that hides the rocky floor. It's not until there's a fire that all the pre-existing trails are open up. In the valleys here, it is somewhat similar to the east, but the northern drier slopes are quite unique. Leaving Quarren, the weather forecast wasn't that great, but the roads were all still dry. Heading south, the wheat farms quickly returned, and I found the first road sign that I've seen in months that gave the distance to Sydney. The roads were all still long and flat, although the wheat and canola covered rolling hills seemed to be taken from an oil painting. The peculiarity of the locals' love affair with the sandstone building is quite noticeable, with a number of long since abandoned hotels lining the roads, and the old sandstone barns still in the middle of paddocks. It's an interesting contrast to the modern wind turbines that you see on the ridgelines. I got to the giant river at Gumtree or Orroroo. They claim it to be over 500 years old. I then pulled into the town service station, which looked only a little younger. I asked the guy behind the counter if he had owned this place since new, and he said no. I then looked for some lunch. The pubs looked no newer and closed. I found a local cafe that was full of artwork, and I managed to find a burger and a coffee. I remember having to go at Hilton for being stuck in the 1980s, but here I seem to have been teleported back to the 1880s. Heading off after lunch with a full tank of petrol and only a few hundred kilometres to go, I noticed that someone had sowed the nature street with wheat. I found this curious because in other places the vegetation planted on public land become owned by the local council. I was making my way slowly, still nursemaiding the bike's loose chain. So far the day wasn't going that bad, but then came the rain. Originally, when planning the route to Adelaide, the map didn't indicate any roadworks along the path. I saw a sign on the side of the road that said that unsealed roads were ahead. I didn't really know if they were referring to the road I was planning to be on, nor did I realise just how long the unsealed roads would go on for. I'm not in the habit of planning or remembering alternative paths. Totally drenched and now covered in mud, I was literally and metaphorically ploughing my way through. The short 400-kilometre hop was now becoming very difficult, and there were some interesting towns like Clare that I wanted to stop and have a look at, but because of the conditions I just kept on going. Still, getting drenched in rain, I finally got to Adelaide, where I was able to hose myself down. Staying at the foot of the Adelaide Hills has been a comfortable experience, as it's a more affluent section of the city and is very peaceful and green. The first several days were consumed by rain, and staying an additional week to explore such a large city was a good idea. My host used the extended stay to run off for a several-week tour through Tasmania. I imagine that having to clean up the rooms between guests prevents many hosts from leaving without closing their Airbnb. Leaving Quarren, I was still quite worried about the lengthening chain that I've been battling since Perth. I had adjusted the rear wheel as much as I could at Cooper Pedy, and I could only cringe at the grinding noise I heard every time I started accelerating. I had booked the bike in for a service with SA Motorcycle when in Perth, and now I was only 20 odd kilometres away. In Sydney many mechanics start at 8, but in Adelaide I was nearly an hour early. I had little else to do but wait, as I had no intention of going anywhere until the chain had been replaced. The bike was last serviced in Broome. Google estimated that I'd been in Adelaide some 5,000 kilometres away, but I think I've now done nearly double that, with all the running around between each stops. The new oil should be okay to get me all the way back to Sydney, while the front tyre is starting looking close to being needing replaced. The rear tyre is also starting to square off. With any luck I should get another 2,000 to 3,000 kilometres out of them before I need some new ones. That should get me all the way through Tasmania, and I'd likely to get them replaced while in Melbourne. The drone slid off my lap, and while it only fell about half a metre to the ground, it hit head on. It still had the camera cover on, but the impact was enough to break the gimbal arm. On closer inspection, the cover clips onto the arm, and the force of the impact went straight through it. It's going to cost another $1,000 odd to replace, and I also took the opportunity to purchase the drone refresh policy, because in hindsight, the design of the DJI Mini 3 Pro has no protection for the camera at all, and I'm likely going to break a number of them. I also had a look at buying the Ultra drone, but they're still too expensive. Comment your suggestions below, as I don't want to buy another DJI drone. It's been raining almost the entire first week and the final weekend. The maximum daily temperature in the beginning was only about 14 degrees, making it colder at the end of spring than winter is in Sydney. Some of them blasted few for a few days in the beginning of the second week, but it's now starting to rain again. It's been proving a very good choice to get some new rain gear while I'm here in Adelaide for the rest of the trip. The Adelaide Hills to the east of the city provide a wonderful backdrop with some breathtaking views. Dodging potholes has been painful. The roads around here are some of the most shocking I've seen so far on this trip. I do feel sorry for anyone driving a lowered down sports car in Adelaide, as the bumps go right through the hardened suspension, far worse than it would on the bike. The local drivers are some of the worst I've seen, and some of the drivers obviously have no idea that lane filtering is legal, but are still self-righteous enough to run up my rear while tooting the horn. Maybe I shouldn't be sitting here just dissing on Adelaideans too much, and realise that as much as I don't fit into this place, there are obviously numerous people who do. I'm sure that not everybody here wants to live in a colonial-styled sandstone home, as there are many obnoxious McMansions around here too. But my personal value system is so different from that of the locals that I really can't wait to leave. To me, a polished turd is still a turd, and if you are better than me, then you shouldn't have any issues proving it. As much as I was a freak in Nimbin, in Adelaide the locals just swing to a different beat, with the lumpy roads coordinating their sway. Next stop is Mount Gambier by Kingston southeast. This time, National Route 1 is a long way there, so there's no point trying to avoid it. It's great to get back to only having to travel 500 kilometres per hop and also having somewhere interesting for lunch. So thanks for following my adventures around Australia, and remember to go out there and do something to enjoy your day. Recording this video in the only half shelter from the rain I was able to find, a powerful storm hit and uprooted my plans. Adelaide has proven to be a very difficult stop in a number of ways, and this storm was just the latest one. The heavy winds and lightning from the storm knocked out the power at my accommodation and left me without hot water, heating or internet for over 30 hours. I consider myself lucky to have had a hot shower and coffee while packing up the bike in the rain. Adelaide is the sort of place where the knives seem to be out for me in a big way, and I was happy to get out of there, even with my tail between my legs.